There was a time when this was happening in Somalia, and
Yes.
international
Yep.
fishing fleets would come in and they would take as much as they wanted without permission or respect to the local communities there. So the fishermen and the youth banded together as a militia to stop this from happening because this was not okay.
Right.
And then they were, the whole narrative that you heard in the news was these are pirates that are stealing
Exactly.
international fishing fleets and ships. Why would they do this? But then the thing is, when you ask why would they do this, you're not really getting the answer. You're just saying we just need to get rid of them. And it's like, well, they're protecting their land.
This is Salam and Hello, where stories of joy and justice vibrate with the rhythm of Africa and the diaspora.
We're worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then, we say, hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to.
Salam and hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Lilly Piper, and as always, we are so grateful that you have tuned in today. So as we have been diving into season 2 of the show, we are so pleased that today we are literally diving into the depths of the ocean with a dear friend who is a shark geneticist and biologist. And not only is he a shark geneticist and biologist, but he is a Kenyan shark geneticist and biologist, which makes him, I think, one of the very few people in the world representing both the continent and the beautiful oceans that surround us. Before I tell you more about him, I just want to say, for my family, going to the coast has been a great privilege of living in this beautiful country. Some of our favorite memories are, being in Diani, being in Mombasa, letting all of our cares kind of roll away and enjoying the beauty of nature. I remember a few years ago, however, my kids were in the ocean, we're having a good time. My husband was really sure to tell them about these undertows and being careful about that. And then at some point, somebody shouted, screamed, and started running out of the water. My first thought, of course, is that there's a shark. What else could it be? We all scream, we all run out. Turns out it was just a jellyfish. But of course, it made me start to wonder, we have just been enjoying the coast, but are we in danger? Is there any threat? And as somebody who spent a lot of time in the US, there was never a summer that went by that someone in Florida, in California, that there wasn't some kind of shark attack, so to speak, that made the news and caused panic and fear. So for that time in the coast, I remember thinking, okay, that's it. Here we go. We're going to be on the news. Thankfully, it was not that. But it certainly just reminded me how deep and wide the ocean is. And if I'm not wrong, I think water covers more of the earth than the land does. And yet we have yet to really understand how to, what's in the ocean and what its benefits can be. And then more importantly, how to conserve, protect, and engage with nature in a way that generations ahead will thank us for. And as we're all aware, this week in Nairobi was the climate conference, ACS, and billions of dollars have been pledged to conserve the oceans, to conserve, terrestrial life as well. And yet, I think the next generation will probably point their fingers at us and ask a lot of questions as to why we didn't do more. But today, I am just thrilled to have somebody on the show that actually gives me great hope for the future of our continents and our world's oceans and their marine life. Gibbs Kuguru, soon to be Dr. Gibbs Kuguru, is a dear, dear family friend. I've known Gibbs for many years. His family is very dear to me. His older brother, Kenny, is one of my best friends in the world, was best man at our wedding. And so I've known Gibbs way before he became this internationally known shark geneticist and superstar. I knew him as Kenny's little brother. And now he is making waves, diving deep, and doing incredible research, ensuring that sharks, not just here on our beautiful coastlines in Kenya, but across the world, that we understand them better. So let me tell you a little bit more about Gibbs. He is currently a part of the cast and crew of the When Sharks Attack 360. Oh, that was a lot to say. When Sharks Attack 360 on Nat Geo TV. He's also at a PhD program currently studying, just furthering his research of sharks and their DNA. He's also the recipient of the 2022 National Geographic Wayfinder Award, which is pretty outstanding for such a young researcher. He is following his passion for sharks from South Africa to the Maldives, but his story starts here in Nairobi. So I am just so thrilled to welcome my friend Gibbs Kuguru to the show. Gibbs, karibu nyumbani.
Thank you, Lily. I'm glad to be here, and it's such a pleasure.
Oh, I'm so excited. You know, our first memories together, like we're at Ken and Ruth's wedding years ago, and who knew we'd be here on the show talking about your research many years later. So it's really a joy for me.
Yeah, it's also my pleasure as well. And not much has changed. I'm still a snotty kid, well, snotty adult. So yeah, it's crazy to think that we've known each other for that long already.
I tell you, I'm gonna keep all the skeletons in the closet, so to speak. But your brother, I talked to him yesterday, he was like, oh, don't. This is what you need to say, but we'll save that for the outtakes.
Yeah, so he would want to expose me.
For sure. He had some ideas. But before we, dive deep into kind of the big picture of your research, I think for many people, they would want to just understand, first of all, how do you, a Nairobi kid who grew up in urban settings, become such a dedicated marine researcher? Talk us through kind of your path from being a city kid to somebody who spends most of his time now underwater.
Yeah, well, growing up in Nairobi, I felt I was sort of insulated from what the comings and goings were in the ocean. And the only exposure that I had were a few documentaries that would show up here and there on Nat Geo or Animal Planet. And then also KTN used to periodically air Jaws. And in my mind, that sort of sealed the deal that I was never going to go into the ocean because it scared me. And I watched it as a kid multiple times with my family. And I just thought, this is never going to work out for me.
That was a family movie of choice for like bonding time.
Yeah. It's usually my brother Fred that for some reason every time I watch Jaws, I remember him being there, and also he used to tease me about it. So, yeah. Again, the ocean. It was far away. It felt far away from Nairobi, even though we have our own coast in Kenya. But when I finished my bachelor's, I had an opportunity to apply for jobs, and my undergraduate supervisor had passed on this flyer that said, come dive with sharks in South Africa. It was an internship doing cage diving, and I can still remember feeling that initial fear of just like, there's no way I could do a job like this. But I signed up just out of curiosity, just to see what would happen. And then I got the job. And then it became very real. And I thought, okay, I really have to seriously consider this now, because it's like, honestly, it was the only job that was available for me at that moment. And I guess I was just intrigued, because when I looked at the flyers, I would see people working with sharks. And that also told me that if there is a possibility for them to do the job, surely I can do it as well. And I showed up for the job a few months after I got accepted, and then I worked at that company for 6 years, diving with sharks all around South Africa. And at that stage, it was, for me, written in stone. That's what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I just knew it.
Wow. I have to ask you, we saw you at some point in South Africa. I don't know if you were working at that company or when you were in school. Do you remember?
Yeah. I was still studying. I was doing my master's in genetics at Stellenbosch, and you guys came and saw the lab.
Yeah.
I think we went wine tasting after that or so.
This is not what this show is about. This show is about sharks. What we did after does not matter. But yes, we may have had a glass or two.
Not trying to expose you guys.
Yeah, you did. You took us around. I have such fond memories of that trip. I'm curious though, you talked about, you saw these flyers, you thought, hey, I can do it too. But there must have been a moment that were the people in those flyers Black? Because I'm wondering if you were looking at them and seeing Black Africans thinking, oh, there's our people in the water, I can do it too. Or you just have this kind of innate courage that you thought anything is possible, and why not sharks?
Yeah, and so in the flyers, I don't remember seeing a single Black person in any of the marketing materials. But I guess in my mind, I kind of thought, as a human being I'm able-bodied, I can think for myself. Um, it should be possible, and if you can see a path forward and there's possibility, and you have the will to do it, it can be done. And I gotta say, you touched upon a really important point there. It's like there's maybe not as much representation in some of these fields as there should be, and there's more now when I look at certain organizations like Minorities in Shark Science, which really exemplifies, how it is possible for people who you typically won't see in a shark documentary to still push the boundaries of shark research and exploration. And the more I see these types of things, the more I feel like I am not alone in this. There are African shark researchers all throughout the continent. This is it is part of our territory, and I think that we have just as much of a place there as anyone else doing this job.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and we were talking before we came on mic about the show Team Sayari, that was National Geographic's and Disney's first kind of completely African focused children's show on nature. And you were one of the heroes that was featured in that series for this exact purpose, to show this young generation behind us, the 5, 6, 7-year-olds who are now watching documentaries, that they can be anything they want to be, because here's Gibbs Kuguru underwater studying sharks. Wasn't on KTN when you were a kid, but now it is for the kids here, which is really, like you said, there's progress.
Wow.
And I'm excited that you are going to be one of those faces that kids will look and say, yeah, I saw that guy Gibbs, he could do it, I can do it too, which is only hopeful. But tell me a little bit more about, when you think about, it sealed my fate, is what you said after 6 years there. What was it about sharks or marine life that captured your curiosity and your attention in that way?
Yeah, I think and I'll probably say this word quite often in this conversation because I use this word a lot. And I think a big part of that was changing the narrative, because what I had seen for my whole life in the print media and in the news about sharks was death. There's only death if you go there. And when you actually sit on the boat or swim in the water or encounter these animals in on a dive or so, you realize that this is not true. It's not completely true, at least. Sharks are wild animals. People do get bitten by these animals, and sometimes these people do die. But it's the same story as you would get from animals like lions or hippos or elephants. But that does not make them these evil characters. And I think for me, that the whole idea that this was not going to be possible was made worse by these types of narratives. And I think showing up and realizing that there's personalities to these animals, there's a possibility to understand these animals, and then also safely interact with them. Then I thought, okay, well, we're not going to listen to the Daily Mail, for example. We're going to trust our instinct and also the mounds of data that's available about these animals. So that's really what I feel like, is that narrative. It completely evaporated for me.
So take me to your first dive, the first time that you're really encountering these animals close up. Do you remember what that felt like?
Yeah, it was an out of body experience, I would say. I do remember the anxiety building up, because this was not just seeing the animals from a boat. You are going into the water unprotected. I mean, all you've got is like a spongy wetsuit on.
Oh, you're not in one of the cages? I'm thinking that you do some of those in the cage, at least the first one.
Yeah, the first time I was in the water with the sharks, it was in a cage. But I would say that there was that feeling of there's at least a little bit of security here, because you have steel or aluminum bars between you and the animal. but I wouldn't say that was my first true experience with sharks. I mean, again, when you're out of the cage, you become very aware that it's not, you can't just be there. You have to be present. And the things that you do, your mannerisms, your body language, all these things play into how your interaction will go. And I think that it teaches me that, first of all, when it comes to sharks, these things have to be very conscious. You can't just be like, if you're feeling a bit of fear, you've got to say, okay, I'm feeling some fear. I'm not going to display that fear. And if you're just enjoying the dive and being, present and knowing that the sharks are there, acknowledging they're there, making eye contact, you'll have a great time. These animals are highly attuned to observing prey in distress. And their psyche is like, well, if I see a prey in distress, more often than not, this is an opportunity for me to forage. And you obviously don't want to be hunted by a shark, which is why they tell you don't act like prey.
Which is how? Give us that practical. What does prey do? Are they flailing around? I mean, I don't imagine many of us will find ourselves maybe deep diving, but we might be enjoying the water somewhere. So what's a basic kind of guidance on how to keep yourself safe should you find yourself in that situation?
First thing is don't run away. If you see a shark,
okay.
don't run away, because there is no way you're going to outswim a shark. The best thing is to just maintain your position and try to keep eye contact with the animal at all times to show them that, number one, you're not afraid of them, you're not afraid that something's going to happen, and that this is not food. I am not food. And I feel like a lot of situations where people encounter sharks, their initial reaction is, I got to swim away as fast as possible. So your heart rate increases. You start to splash around in the water. So it starts to also feel those vibrations, pick up the electricity that's coming off of your body. And then it starts to, again, visualize you as food rather than not food, because we're not nutritious for sharks. We're not part of their menu. So we shouldn't act like we're part of their menu. And
Yeah. Okay.
easier said than done.
Remember that.
Yeah.
So have you come into that close of encounter? I mean, you're saying maintain eye contact. I pray I never have to maintain eye contact with a shark, but I imagine in your line of work, you do. So what does that feel like? I mean, I know sometimes scientists, we interview them and they have the theoretical understanding, but if you take, 12-year-old Gibbs who's watching KTN and you put him in the water next to you, maintaining eye contact with that shark who, Gibbs the adult as a researcher, what does that feel like when you are that close to an animal of that kind of power?
Yeah, it's humbling to say the least. You have this animal that is, for example, in April, I was in the south of the Maldives diving with some tiger sharks, and there were it was this very weird shoal of sharks where we had basically like 95% of these sharks were female, and then like 10% of those animals were large females. And they're dominant. I mean, it is just one of those things where you stand no chance. I mean, you're outmatched at every turn here, but they let you stay there. And you almost feel like you're in the court of some kind of nobility or royalty, because it's that humbling feeling of just like, oof, wow, this species has been around before the dinosaurs, before the trees. Much of life has not seen as many eras as sharks have. And you're just allowed to sit there and watch them swim. It's like there's that humbleness, but there's also that joy of just like, I can't believe this is happening.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I hope that for anybody in any vocation that you feel that kind of joy and humility in your work, and for you to have that kind of close encounter and to feel that instead of fear is pretty extraordinary. And it sounds like it is your research and your understanding of the data that has brought you to a point where you can interact with these animals in this way. So walk us through a day in the life of a shark researcher, a shark geneticist, which is hard to say, by the way. I'm proud that I keep getting that out correctly.
I got to rebrand that, I think.
You might have to, like a shark genie or something. And you're also a National Geographic, I don't want to say content creator, that doesn't seem fair, but in your interaction with them, you are telling stories about these creatures in a way that hopefully young people, adults, anyone, the public can understand. So walk me through what a day in the life, a day in the week for you is now as somebody who's really full-time thinking and working with sharks.
Yeah, that's the thing is with my work, a day in the life feels it's a bit hard to capture just one thing, because there are some mornings where I wake up, at 4 a.m. I put my wetsuit on, cruise out into the middle of the ocean, and jump in the water with like 30 sharks. And then there's also days that I spend all day in the lab, mixing reagents, manipulating DNA. And then there's the, still, since I'm a PhD student, there's the long nights of writing papers and analyzing data. And it's very varied. So I feel like it number one, it keeps me on my toes, but it also, it's exciting, and it's mentally stimulating. And I feel like most of my job is just spent trying to solve really small puzzles all the times, whether that's in the wild or in the lab or behind my computer. It's all about taking this massive mosaic that is nature and saying, okay, how do we understand this just a little bit more every day? And you just try to understand that one morsel, and then you try to link all those little morsels together at one point, just to say like, I know how this works, or yeah, or even better, I don't know how this works. Let's try something new.
You are truly a researcher if you're thinking even better how this doesn't work. But so why is it important to understand the very things that you're talking about, the puzzles, how they fit together, manipulating the DNA? Why does that matter at the end of the day for the rest of us who are not at all, even close to your world?
Yeah, I see what you mean there. So sometimes I have this problem myself where I try to find, how is the work that I'm doing meaningful to anyone else except shark scientists? And I have this when I have conversations about things like protecting the planet and preserving our natural resources, because sometimes when we talk about ourselves as human beings, it's almost like we're talking about some extraterrestrial animal that's come to planet Earth, even though we are Earthlings ourselves, and our existence is inherently and intrinsically linked to every living being on this planet, which for their benefit is our benefit, and their survival is also our survival. It's our community. That's our literal community. And I think, yeah, when we look at the entirety of the ecosystem, we can't have oceans without sharks, in the same way that we can't have a savanna without lions. I sort of think of these animals as the tax man of the ecosystem, and yeah, I don't know. I think in my mind they keep everything healthy by taking out the sick and the weak animals. They promote the stronger animals to give them more space and more resources to proliferate. So in the end, if we're really talking about survival of the fittest, sharks are the vector by which that happens in nature.
Mm-hmm. You've said that so well, Gibbs. I mean, really, I love this idea that they are an extension of our community, and their health is also our health. And certainly the climate crisis, conservation is, every single sector is thinking about this, whether or not you're in financial world or in the education world, none of us can escape it because this is our home. And you said it so beautifully. So let's maybe take a turn towards conservation. I think about my kids who are just a little bit older than you, which really makes me feel old. But, you know, one of the things that they say to us all the time, kind of sarcastically, is like, thanks a lot. You really left us a fantastic set of circumstances to go into adulthood with, you know, between, you know, all kinds of racial issues to like the planet is melting. So thank you so much, parents. And you know, I have to sit with that sometimes. And, you know, we, of course, have tried to adjust our behaviors so that we're better about what we consume and how we live. But when we think about conservation, and in particular, if we can bring this home to Kenya and Africa and the continent, you know, because of the history of colonialism, a lot of these conservation efforts started under colonial rule. And what that looked like was the capture of land and you know, the overtaking of traditional practices or indigenous communities' homes. And to this day, we know in many places they've never been returned. You know, as a shark researcher, you know, I imagine that the oceans are the largest place to, probably the hardest place to colonize, and yet there's still evidence of that. So how are you balancing kind of your conservation messaging, knowing the context in which, you know, we still here in Kenya, there's still a lot of resistance to some of that, because the idea is that this is still rooted in a system that has not served Black Africans. And so people have been displaced, communities, practices have been, you know, minimalized. I think you get what I'm saying. Like, how do we now, as Africans in particular, kind of reclaim our place, and both in the right to conserve, but also to enjoy nature as we did before?
Yeah, I love how you contextualized conservation in that way, because I truly do believe that as Africans, we have a very tricky relationship with the term and the practice of conservation. Because you have to ask what is actually being conserved here when we're talking about that. You know, 100 years ago or more, there were many African communities living in nature, and not just living in nature, but coexisting with nature. The ecosystem was fairly more balanced at that stage. There was more wildlife, more diversity of life. And since colonialism, we've developed this thing called conservation. But since conservation, animals have been dying at a faster rate somehow. And you have to, like, you know, just look at the scale of time and say, like, does this add up? How is it that since conservation has happened, we've had, like, you know, I think it's like we've had only like 2 white rhinos left in the Mara Conservancy, which is essentially that area. They're functionally extinct.
Yeah.
And in the same breath, thousands of acres of land have been taken away from local communities in the name of preserving or conserving wildlife. But what about conserving the human life and human practices in those areas? Because in my estimations, for example, the Maasai were great stewards to the planet, in Kenya and in Tanzania as well. We had, you know, they never overgrazed in areas. And for example, I talked about the tax man. Like, for example, if a lion wanted to tax a Maasai with a cow, he would do that. And there would be an understanding that that's how it goes. We're all living here. We all try to make the best of what we have, and it was fine for a time. And then in putting it in the context also of our marine resources, surveys have been done between Kenya and Tanzania looking for shark and ray life. And we have a very unique species of, I'll just call it a species of shark for the sake of argument, called a sawfish. It's essentially like a flat shark whose nose looks like this medieval bludgeoning tool. It's like a sword with spikes coming out of it. Fantastic animal. I mean, really, you can't imagine like the different kinds of things nature produces. And you see a sawfish and it's like, wow, this animal, this is an African animal we have here. But if you go to Diani or to Zanzibar or anywhere along the Kenyan or Tanzanian coast, you will not find one. And that is because these areas are completely overfished. And it's not by local artisanal fishermen, it is by international fishing fleets. And these fleets come sometimes without licenses, they take what they want, and then they leave essentially nothing for the communities that live there, who, in my estimations, have been good stewards to the ocean. And going back to that thing about narratives, there was a time when this was happening in Somalia, and
Yes.
international fishing fleets would come in and they would take as much as they wanted without permission or respect to the local communities there. So the fishermen and the youth banded together as a militia to stop this from happening, because this was not okay.
Right.
And then they were, the whole narrative that you heard in the news was these are pirates that are stealing international fishing fleets and ships. Why would they do this? But then the thing is, when you ask why would they do this, you're not really getting the answer. You're just saying we just need to get rid of them. And it's like, well, they're protecting their land. If you told me that someone went from another country into Spain or United States or to Japan and then just started fishing there, you'd be like, that's a ridiculous premise. Like, that can't happen. You can't just do that. It's not
1000%.
your land, it's not your waters. But we still somehow, and of course, this is the same scourge that's affecting Kenyan and Tanzanian waters. So I think in some regards, we should all honestly pay a little bit of respect to our Somali brothers who are actually taking the next step and being like, we're not going to just let this, neo-colonialistic practice happen. You guys, if you want to have fish, come, you get your license, and you pay us or whatever. This is not aid. Actually, this is aid. This is foreign aid.
Right, right. Equity, yeah, because now we are on equal bargaining discussions of cost benefits for both sides. You've said it so powerfully, Gibbs. I've actually not seen people weave that together quite as well as you have, because I think what gets muddled down is that conservation is the only way to protect our natural resources. Like, there's a tool, it's called conservation, that's it. And I appreciate that you're saying there have always been good stewards. And by switching to a one-size-fits-all kind of terminology and story and method, we have eliminated the ways in which historically we have safeguarded our resources. So in your field in particular, and thank you for the story. Is it not hammerhead? What was that shark called? Tiger shark?
Yeah, I've worked with lots of different sharks: hammerheads, great whites, tiger sharks.
But what was the one in Tanzania and Kenya you were saying was gone?
Oh, the sawfish.
The sawfish.
Yeah, you should Google that. It's crazy.
I'm definitely gonna Google that. We might have to use it in the promo of this episode. But I was just thinking about how I'm wondering, somebody like me, for example, somebody who feels like they're aware and trying to do better, how are we going to get the messages around the sawfish out? And what role are you seeing, maybe media or even yourself with the platform that you now have, being able to communicate that message?
Yeah, that's a question I don't really know the answer to, because it's really hard to change people's social attitudes to any issue which they're not familiar with, or they're not, completely entrenched in. And sometimes I feel like, telling stories, for example, about the vast and wonderful life that we have in Kenya, and the fact that this life also has a right to exist and to be there and be protected, and then obviously showing these animals in their glory. That is, in my mind, that's what would change it for me. Of course, we have a lot of people that want to protect elephants and lions and rhinos because they've seen these animals, and maybe some of them have also gotten an opportunity to interact with these animals on a game drive, for example. If people know that they're there, I would hope that their gut reaction would be like, first of all, like, why haven't I seen about this? Why is no one talking about this? And secondly, how can I use my shillings or my votes to support this? And I think it also it does have to come down to the government empowering people to be able to participate in their own environment.
Yeah.
I like how they do it in the Maldives. I work in the Maldives fairly frequently with a lot of communities there. And some of these places I work in are UNESCO Man and Biosphere reserves. And these types of areas are characterized by the local communities influencing how their environment is run and protected. And I'll give you an example. I, as a researcher, go to one of these islands, and before I do any work, I speak to the stakeholders, I speak to the local councils, and I tell them what I want to do. I want to go there. I want to catch sharks. I want to take tissue samples and analyze the DNA so I can learn about these animals and how to protect them. And I went to one spot, and I gave them the whole pitch, same pitch I gave everywhere, and they just said no. They're like, no, we don't need that here. Thank you, but we wish you the best on your journey. And then I left, and that was it. And of course, I wanted to work there, but I also really appreciated the fact that they had veto power. The guys on the ground had veto power. They just said, we don't really want this. Sorry. And I wish that we had something similar like that in Kenya, where if the fishermen were like, hey, we've got these massive trawlers that are just raking the ocean floor for everything that we own in our environment. We don't want this anymore. Please go away. And then they just go away. And I'm like, that's what we need. We need the people that are there to have the ability to just, to have a say in what they have.
That's a powerful story, which I think is actually to your credit as a researcher to go in and actually also ask for that permission. I think we see so much of that disappearing, or if it ever existed in the first place. So your engagement and your style, I think, is unique. So I think we need both. We both need researchers, government entities, conservation efforts to, number one, always center those indigenous communities and voices, and also them to feel and for them to own the power to say what they do and they don't want. I think that's a really powerful story of how it could work, and something we can aim for, which makes me really think, again, go back to the sawfish. It must be at times very, very heavy weight to know that you're working with some species that are either about to go extinct, or maybe beginning of your work, you saw them more frequently and now less. That must be a heavy weight to know that the extinction of certain species does depend on how we interact with them. How do you manage and handle that?
Yeah, there's certainly that dread that sits on your heart when you think about maybe the efforts that you're putting forward may not result in nature coming back, bouncing back to what it used to be. 10,000 leagues under the sea, for example. But I had this thing where of course you have to justify every day you wake up to do this, and it's just like, well, I just think that if there's something worth fighting for, worth protecting, then it should be fought for, and you should strive to protect whatever is left, because that is an opportunity. And I think there will always be opportunities, and whether it doesn't necessarily have to be sharks. I mean, it can be forests. It can just be planting trees. And I love the Wangari Maathai, that protest of just going out and planting trees and being like, this is what's happening now. I'm going to do this. And now we have better forest protections and people that are actually involved in this work. And I think that, that's, you just have to be so whatever, man, I'm going to do this. We're just doing this.
Yeah,
And it's, if there's something if there's work to be done, then we're going to do it.
absolutely.
Yeah, I can't, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I hear you. No, I feel that there's the weight of the responsibility and also the power to do your thing, your little thing, which is what one guy, Matthias, said, I will be a hummingbird, that was like her little thing. But it was a big thing in the end and moves us still today. So you talked about a little bit earlier that sharks have personalities. And so I want to ask you a few questions around that. Because I think that resonates. Like if I don't understand some of your research and the words that you've said in this podcast, I do understand personalities. As a mother of four and a lover of many, I get that. So tell me, let's equate some people to personalities. Maybe we can do some celebrities and then we can do some people that you might know. But let's start with you. If you had to say you had the personality of a particular kind of shark, which shark would it be? And tell us what that personality is.
Um, I would say if I was a shark, if I was born a shark, I probably would be a blue shark. That's because kind of that awkward skinny kid that doesn't really have um, spatial awareness. I tend to invade people's spaces in very strange ways, but
That's the
not
younger
in an
brother.
aggressive way.
Yes. Yeah, that's the baby brother in you, that's your job actually.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, more often than not, when you're diving with blue sharks, you're literally putting your hand on your nose and being like, just please, a little bit of room between us would be nice. And it's the weirdest thing. They're like puppy dogs. It's again, that's another type of personality you don't really see being talked about
Yeah.
with sharks.
Yeah, I don't think people make that metaphor often, that they're just puppy dogs of the sea. Okay, so let me give you somebody else. How about Barack Obama? What kind of shark would you say he is?
Oh my gosh, Barack Obama. I mean, okay, first of all, Barack Obama is the coolest, most stately stud, um, but also very powerful and measured. I would have to give Barack Obama. I had to. He's definitely a great white. I
Great
mean,
white, yeah.
yeah. I mean, honestly, when it comes to great whites, you should see the way they strut. I mean, when they're next to a boat, they are just in charge. But they also don't have this, this feeling of like hyper aggression. But
Okay.
every strut, like, yeah, I got it. Like I
Yeah.
like that Barack
That's
Obama
why.
was like, I got it. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is a great white what Jaws is based on? Because I've actually never seen Jaws. But is that the shark in Jaws?
That is the shark in Jaws, indeed.
Okay, okay. Do you recommend that movie, by the way, anymore? Is that something you say people should watch or not really?
Honestly, it was a good movie, but I think actually, have you heard of the Jaws effect?
I have not.
So it's this psychological term where people base their their view on a real world issue off of a fictional portrayal of an issue. And of course, Jaws touched upon shark attacks. And
Of course.
then the sort of the end goal of the characters in Jaws was we have to kill that shark. And
Yeah,
that's how people actually think about sharks these days. If a shark attack happens, they go and they're like, okay, well, now we're going to go and kill sharks. I mean, the Australians have done this famously over the last few years, but it doesn't equate because even if you go out to the sea and you kill some sharks, it doesn't necessarily reduce shark attacks. It just
of course.
increases shark deaths, and the data has shown this fairly clearly. Um, the Jaws effect is very powerful, and it is based off the movie Jaws because of how it was the first ever summer blockbuster movie because of how big and powerful it was. And I think I liked the making of the movie. It was a technically very good movie. But yeah, if I would
Yeah.
say I don't necessarily recommend it because I know how people will think if they're
Yeah.
watching it about sharks, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Fair. Fair.
yeah,
Fair enough. Okay, let me give you two more people that you have to give us personalities for.
all
Let's
right.
bring it back home. Your brother Kenny, what kind of shark is he?
Ooh.
You
So
had to know this one. I had to say Kenny. I want to ask you about Ruth. I don't think she's a shark at all. So let's focus on Kenny.
all right, all right. I will give Kenny a tiger shark, and here's why. Tiger sharks can make a meal out of anything. They thrive in just about every environment that they're in, and I think when I look at my brother Kenny, I mean, he's been the CEO of like multiple companies and made it work
Mm,
in
mm.
different industries. And I think, okay, well, if you have to put those two together, we're talking about a tiger shark that is like, if it's hot, if it's
Yeah,
cold, if it's salty, whatever, I'm gonna make it work for myself.
yeah, I love that. Oh, you're such a nice brother. You're such a nice brother. You get points for that.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one, I'll bring it home to Kenya again. I guess Barack Obama was also Kenyan, shout out. What about Lupita Nyong'o? What would you say? What kind of shark would she be?
Oh man, Lupita. All right, this one's gonna throw it because I mean Lupita is also like just she's powerful, she's beautiful. Uh, Honestly, I'll have to go with a mako shark because a mako shark is also sleek, and it's the thing about some of these offshore sharks like mako sharks is that they really thrive on their own in a way. And I think Lupita is the kind of person that, well, when I look at her, she's very much a self-made in so many ways. I mean, she
Mhm.
breaks boundaries without really. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just her. It's all her. And I think when I think of her again, beautiful, sleek, and with a mako shark, I think I'd have to pair her with that one.
well, thanks for playing along because I think my goal in that was to just increase our language of sharks. I think we only ever think about the great white, and that's the one we know. But just hearing you describe from the sawfish that sadly is not as prevalent to all the different ones you've just said, it hopefully increases our understanding of how beautiful and dynamic these creatures are. So as we kind of start to wrap up this conversation, it brings me back to the storytelling of the movie and now your work with Nat Geo. So first of all, congratulations on being awarded the Wayfinder Award. That's
Thank you.
pretty extraordinary, Gibbs. So proud of you. What did that mean to you to be recognized by probably one of the world's, if not the world's leading kind of nature-focused brand? What did that mean to you?
Yeah, it was huge. Honestly, it was such an honor. And I had no expectations that something like that would come my way. Um, I thought it was quite interesting also the timing of it all because around the time I got my award was somewhere around like the 10-year mark where I had actually been working with sharks. And when I, first signed up for that internship and got on the boat and started diving with animals, I thought I was just going to be a fisherman, just living on the coast. But then it also, because I wasn't really looking to get something out of it except for my own personal enjoyment, I really developed a lot of skills, and I think the Wayfinder Award, it just gave me that boost, the confidence boost, and also the elevation to say like, yeah, the work that I'm doing actually, um, yeah, it's meaningful to sharks in a way, and I just hope that I can do it for another 10 years,
Yeah,
because I also feel like at some stage it also is going to be meaningful to people to know that there has been some groundwork laid for the next generation of shark scientists and conservationists and African shark scientists and conservationists to come and and I only hope that eventually I can do what I'm doing in Kenya. And I'm
Mhm.
actively looking, by the way, if anyone's listening in on this, I'm actively looking for opportunities to work in Kenya on shark and marine conservation. So hit me up on my IG.
Listen,
Um,
that would be the dream for all of us to have you back home.
yeah, shameless plug, hey.
Got to do
Uh,
it.
but yeah, that's just my thought is like
Yeah.
it's just a bit more fuel in the engine so that we can just keep going, and
Yeah.
that's all I want.
Yeah, I hear you. That's I think that's all we all want, right? We all want to be able to come, I shouldn't say all, but many of us just want to come home and contribute something to this place that we call home, and awards like the Wayfinder Award. I'm so thrilled that they recognized your work. I remember the early days when you were first getting into it, and of course your family's mine. So, but I think everyone was like, shark geneticist or shark research, like why? And like just it was so brand new. I'm curious to hear, like, especially your parents, when you first said you're going to be up close with these creatures, were they worried for you? How did they feel about your choice of vocation?
Yeah, I remember getting in the first couple of weeks daily phone calls just to make sure that I was still alive, and constantly like, hey, listen, if you need to come home, you just let us know. We'll send you right back. It's fine. You
Yeah.
don't have to do this thing. You don't have to do it. I'm like, guys. And again, I also had my fair share of trepidation with the whole thing because I had no idea what was going to happen or how it was all going to play out. Um, but I think you have to be intrepid about these things, and it's okay to be scared and to feel lonely sometimes,
Yeah.
um, uh, especially if you're trying to break into something that you've never done or never seen anyone like you do. And I really appreciated my parents because in the end, um, for sure they did. I don't think they wanted me there, but they supported me and they never made me feel like they weren't going to be there for me to help me get to the next level.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to me, that's love. It's saying like, I don't fully understand what you're doing just now. I know you know what you're doing, and we're just gonna help you get there. And and yeah, I don't know. I think that is to me like the greatest example of like what it means to like really be a parent.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Have they had a chance to come up close to your work? Have you been able to take them on a boat or close to I don't know if they dive, but
Oh yeah. So a couple of years ago, I when I was still at the cage diving company, I did take them out on the boat. I took my Kenny was also there. A bunch of my other
okay.
siblings were there too. I was surprised. They just got on the boat and I mean, I felt like they were so cool about it. I'm like, do you know how scared I was the first time? And you guys are just jumping on the boat. You're like, all
You
right,
though.
let's go. They're way too cool for me, honestly. Like I like if I was in their friend group, I would definitely be the weird one. But I'm glad I can hang out with them every now and then.
That's great. It's family gives us roots, and wings, which is what it sounds like your parents have done for you. You're lucky. You're really, really blessed because
Yeah.
I think for many, especially us on the continent raising our kids, you sacrifice so much to bring them to a certain place. So for them to have that trust in you is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
So Gibbs, tell me what is next for you, and what do you hope also the future of marine conservation work looks like? So maybe I'll start in reverse. What do you hope the future of your work and the work in marine kind of research will look like?
Um yeah, honestly, I don't know. And that's because with my decision making, I tend to just go where something is kind of interesting. And that's how I got into touch with in South Africa. It's how I got in touch with the Maldives, and I like following these less than traveled paths. Less traveled?
Yeah,
What am I
that's
trying to
right.
say? Anyways, I like going down these new paths to try and see what's there. Um, I hope there's going to be more exciting stories to tell, and I'd love to take people along with me.
Yeah.
I think this is also part of me wanting to be able to share this experience, but also to share the stories so that that whole thing can become more rich. I don't want to just be the only guy there. I want to, I've got my best friend comes out on my research trips with me now, Walker, and I want to just build a small pirate squad that
I will come.
Huh?
If you're looking for company, I'll come. Let me know where and when.
Oh yeah, you honestly, if you're willing to commit to it, I will take you out. We will go out and we'll find sharks. I'm actually looking for some sharks in Kenya at the moment.
Okay.
I don't want to give my spot away just yet, but
Sure.
we have some bull sharks that are waiting to just get to see me.
All right.
And
well,
you too.
I'm gonna look forward. We'll talk about it in the group chat. We'll get into that chat and hear the details. But I have to ask you this before we close out, because you're talking about the storytelling and you're part of When Sharks Attack 360 on Nat Geo. Mm-hmm. So I think if we have the Nat Geo channel, we can find you and watch that. But just with the storytelling, with the name When Sharks Attack, is that serving your purposes in terms of the stories you're trying to tell, though? I was curious about that, I have to say. And I know some of that decision is not in your hand. But, what's the potential for a series like that to achieve some of your goals?
Yeah, it's catchy titles like that will always get more viewership when it comes to TV. Of course, it's not the exact narrative you want to paint about sharks, but I think it does touch upon something that we're all concerned about when we think about sharks, because more often than not, when people talk about sharks, they will inadvertently think about shark attacks. And we wanted to bring a scientific perspective to find out what circumstances and what situations give rise to shark attacks. What can we do to better understand them? Because they are understandable. And I think just shedding some light, using some scientific tools will immensely help people be like, okay, we've demystified the shark attack. We know that if we have a bunch of fishermen fishing in an area where there are some large sharks, let's not get in the water because there's, sharks have very sensitive scent receptors. And maybe if I'm swimming there in the midst of all this fish blood and guts, it's not going to be good for me. But there's something more heartfelt to When Sharks Attack 360, and that's the stories of the survivors. Because more often than not, these people that go into the ocean are ocean lovers, real marine enthusiasts that want to be in the sea because that's what they're passionate about. And not once do you ever hear any of the survivors of these negative shark encounters say, I had a bad experience with a shark and now I want to go out and kill every last one of these animals. Right. They always come back and say, yeah, it wasn't my day. I met the tax man, but I can't wait to heal up so I can get back out there again, so I can go fishing or I can go surfing. That's and it's I don't want to minimize the trauma that they had, because it is quite traumatic to be in that situation. But they have that healthy respect for life and for nature. What
about the relationships between humankind and sharks in, let's say, the next 50 years? What do you think is ahead, potentially, if the status quo remains?
Yeah, to me, the status quo right now is still very much fear-based, and there's not a lot of respect and admiration for sharks like that we do for our other, for example, terrestrial predators. So we can't keep going down that road because we simply can't afford it. That it is an existential crisis for sharks. It's also an existential crisis for humans because they sort of maintain the conditions under which we live. So it's worthwhile. I mean, honestly, one of the things I love the most is when I open Instagram and I see, videos of kids talking about wildlife and exploring their backyards, because yeah, these kids are the force that is going to change that. And I don't know. I'm just here. I honestly, I just feel like I'm along for the ride at this stage because, yeah, I feel like my generation is sort of, we've done our thing. We've sort of put our mark in, but the next generation, which are going to be much better informed, much more sensitive and understanding about what happens with the world and with people. I'm so hopeful that we are not going to be living in a fear-based society or a fear-based economy, that there's going to be some real change happening. For nature.
I agree. My bet is on that generation too, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, before we let you go, we ask every guest 2 questions at the end of every conversation. So we'd like to equalize everyone, no matter how famous or big they are. So even though you're a shark geneticist, you're one of us. So Gibbs, what is your favorite drink or beverage?
Favorite drink? Oh, that's a hard one. Yeah, I might have to go for like a smooth but smoky scotch. That's
Wow, okay.
I guess
You're so sophisticated now. I have to really not think of you as little Gibbs. You are a whole man.
Ribena, just kidding.
Well, we'll have to share one when you get home at Christmas. Hopefully you'll be home for Christmas. And then, we focus on joy and justice on this podcast, and a conversation like this is a beautiful example of where the two coexist. The joy of nature, the joy of your work, with the justice of preserving and protecting and stewarding nature. So what is bringing you joy today?
Oh man, what is bringing me joy? Honestly, taking photos and videos of wildlife. I'm looking at my desk right now, and there's just cameras and lenses, and it's never a chore or a task for me to go and capture nature, whether it's trees or bugs, or it doesn't always have to be sharks, but I love just going out and then just watching, these little critters or something like that move around. That makes me happy.
Beautiful. Well, we look forward to seeing some of your work. Maybe a coffee table book or something you can put out for us.
Oh yeah, that's not a bad idea. I should send you guys a print, actually. I've got some cool short photos that should be on the Salam and Hello wall.
That would be. Please look, our wall needs you. It's crying for you.
Yeah.
Our way, we will absolutely put it up. Well, Gibbs, thank you for spending time with me today. It's such a joy to talk to you, to learn from you. National Geographic could not have a better ambassador for their work, and as East Africans, we could not have a better, champion of our land than you. I really just appreciate you so much. So thank you for being on Salam and Hello.
Thank you for inviting me. Such a pleasure.
I'm going to invite you again. So listeners, I hope you've learned something. If you have questions for Gibbs, please send us a DM at Salam and Hello on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can always email us too if you like to go the old school route. Lily at salamandhello.com or producer at salamandhello.com. And so we'd love to hear what you thought about today's conversation. And till we see you next time, I guess we'll see you next week. What am I saying? We'll see you next time, next Tuesday, for a new episode of Salam and Hello.
I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on.